So they're calling your name, they're sending an ovation, and for you to come and receive your Nobel Prize. If that happened with you before, then this workshop is definitely suited for you. You're on the way to plan your career as a researcher and therefore decided to go as a master's student or a PhD student. But for you to go throughout this journey, you need to be equipped with the right tools and ask the right questions. So let's kick a start. So I'm going to cover these following points. If you have any questions during the process, please make sure you post them on the chat box, and I will answer them at the end of the presentation. I will try to allocate 20 to 30 minutes for this talk, for your questions towards the end. So let's start with the main pillar as to how to start to select a research topic. So I'm going to share with you a few basic guidelines for you to help you choose the right topic for you as a graduate student or as a researcher in general. Before you decide on the topic, make sure you read several theses or research articles related to the subject that you are trying to cover, in order to get used to or acquainted with different ideas and individual research styles. You will find your own research styles while writing your paper, by the way. So, but you need to start with a diverse outlook. That will be great for you. Now, also make sure you pick a topic that's close to your heart. Remember that you're going to be stuck with that topic for 3 to 4 years and sometimes even more. So you have to be really passionate about it. You can get as much as advice from your supervisor or from other researchers in the field, but in the end, it should be your own decision and you should like it. And make sure, because you have to create your own independent advice regardless of what other people think. Another point you need to consider is that you have to investigate all theories and models that may come across your way during your studies. And to give you an example, think about the evolution theory. You need to start with it since it evolved from Darwin studies into new evolutionary theories that comes into notion at today's time. And always remember, as much as you want to have the perfect and the best research idea, there's no such thing called perfect in research. Rather than looking for one perfect idea, I want you to consider several ideas. In the initial stages, as you start, you should be open to the craziest notion. Just start with one, and that each one of them has a multiple variation. Think of it as many different topics as you can, even if them may not be useful, but it will bring you closer to the idea you want to achieve. I can give you an example from my own experience as a researcher. So I started my master's degree with this ultimate passion. I majored in the stem cells arena, as I've said before. So 3 years before that, I have already started working on bone marrow transplantations and extracting stem cells and all that. But in my master's, I wanted to work on something really noble. So I said, why not extract stem cells from the mother's breast milk? And to some extent, there was only one study at the time. But what I tried to achieve with it is I wanted to extract it and turn it into a different type of tissue in human body that can help cancer patients. So the idea at the time, it was the perfect question, but it wasn't perfect for me for many reasons. Is that we needed a lot of budget, and second of all, it will take more time than it should be for a master's student, something I will also cover with you. But instead, I also had a backup plan. So I had another idea, which is basically to extract stem cells from another source of tissues, and it was wisdom tooth. And that variation really helped me to complete my master degree in the time allocated to me. So always make sure you have that in place, to always have a backup plan. Also, just make sure that before you decide to start working on your research topic, you should spend some time in advance to find out what looks like a good idea or the right one for you. Make sure that nobody has already completed similar research, or more important, nobody generated or will generate the same results that you did or will do generate. And consider access to needed resources and information, which I will help you to have more idea about throughout the end. And keep your topic to the point. Most PhD students or master students or research students appear to start with over-ambitious projects, and that keeps building one over the another. But then they will reach to a point where they cannot, pursue the study any further. So just make sure you only start with one central question and answer that central question. What happens afterwards is just, outside your publication or your research dissertation. Moreover, make sure you seek advice from your supervisors. They are a good source, and from other experts. And there are many outlets out there that can help you with that. But your supervisor is one way to start with that, and also other colleagues that are in the field. Remember that in science, the only constant is change. So although you will start with one idea, you will end up having the form of this idea changed as you go through it. The main research question remains, but the form of it will also change, because you will also have to be flexible to the idea that things will change as you get more results. So don't get frustrated, and don't, lose hope as you go in the process, because you will face that. Okay, so now we have idea on certain elements that makes a good research topic. Now you have these guidelines, but what makes a good research question? So there are certain questions that you can use as a guideline for you when you think of it to build a good project. And one of them, is it feasible? And when I say it's feasible, which I'll go in more details, can it be achieved in a certain time frame using the same, let's say, budget the institution gave me or any institutions gave you? Is it interesting? In the sense, does it really, is it of any interest to the scientific community, at the broader sense? Would people find it valuable in terms of clinical applications and research applications? Can they build on it? Is it new idea? A new idea or novel idea doesn't mean someone didn't work on it before. It simply means that you create a new results based on the tools that you had or populations you've managed to get hold of. Is it ethical? And this is a very central and important question that many researchers overlook. And I will go through this in more details. Again, is it relevant? Is it relevant for your scientific community, to you as well, on the long term for your career? Because again, remember, whatever you do now will stick to your name in the long term. And I'm using now a few questions that you can use as a guideline when you decide whether or not it's a good research or it's a good research for you, by Robert Smith in his book, Graduate Research. I've cited it here for you just in case if you wanted to go back to it. So again, we're going back to the point. Can you be enthusiastic when you pursue it? That's, again, a very crucial point. You have to have some interest in it. Second point, can your interest be sustained by it? So in other words, are you going to be bored in the coming few years? If the answer is yes, you need to change it. Is the problem solvable? So you have to have a research question that can be actually, resolved. So you can't ask general questions as if your research dissertation is about solving global warming. Because you can't. There are many factors associated to global warming. So your research questions have to always be defined and tangent. So in other words, can be achieved. So you can use certain elements to solve about global warming, but you can't solve global warming. And you can use that questions to other applications. Is it worth doing? In the sense, can you work using this field? There are many, let's say, specialties or research questions, though they are very interesting, they will not get you employed in the future. They will not get you more funds for later studies. So that's something you will know by experience and practice, and also by seeking proper advice. Will it lead to other research problems? Definitely yes. Most likely it will. But to the extent of how large the research problem is, it's something you need to answer. Is it manageable in size? And this, every research study to validate or have some sort of validation, we use samples. And we use the p-value to say whether or not the results are significant. And for that to happen, you have to have a certain or defined sample size. Now, you have to be very rational about it. So don't start with a set of 100,000, but maybe use a representative sample of your population. And you will be able to define it with your co-advisor, given your budget, and also the tools you have in your lab. Okay, the other question again that poses itself, what is the potential for making original contribution to the literature? Again, if you're generating a new methodology, new results, then you are contributing. Just make sure you do a study design before starting your research project in its entirety. That's again something that someone involved in statistics as well as your supervisor can help you with. And again, you should also have some background in statistics. If the problem is solved, well, the results be reviewed well by scholars in your field. And most likely, if you're reading literature review, the answer is yes. Are you or will you become competent to solve it? In another word, do you have the research skill set required to solve that problem? So if you're choosing, for example, a research in bioinformatics, then by default, you should be able to use the nib cutter, which is a software related to the genome cutting, for example. So that's a small example of being competent. And by solving it, will you have demonstrated independent skills in your discipline? And that's something, again, you can cover with your supervisor. And will the necessary research prepare you in the area of demand or promise for the future? This is a personal question more for you. It's not only important that you hold your degree, but it's also important to be able to use it in the future, be able to employ more research in your area as well. So again, we're going back to the topic of, is your topic feasible? Is it manageable? For some students, choosing a topic for their dissertation comes by nature, or it may have been part of the reason they pursue their PhD. So you may have thought of it in your early career, whether you're undergrad or you're a master's student. However, for others, it can be a bit of a struggle. This can be for a number of reasons. Perhaps you had something at mind at your country. For example, if you're studying a certain disease and it's related to a population, and then you have changed it. So your population that you wanted to use your sample have changed. Or you discovered that the topic you really love have certain ethical restriction, like you need patient consent for a sensitive, let's say, study, and then you have the risk of having that rejected. So all these you have to make sure it's answered. So again, there is also several questions you can use to ask whether your research topic is feasible. So what is the specific problem? Always make sure you know what's the problem you're trying to address. And this pertains more to being able to identify the variables of your study. Mind you that for any study that you're trying to achieve, and you know that perhaps now as a researcher, There are dependent variables, there are independent variables. The dependent variables are those that rely on the factors you introduce in your study. Think of it of having, let's say, water solution, alkaline, or anything you can dissolve in that water, and temperature. Now, the alkaline solution or solute you're trying to dissolve in the water is what we call the dependent variables. And then introducing the lights and the solubility of the solution depends on whether or not the factor like light exists. So temperature, sorry. So if we have higher temperature, the solubility of the solvents we have also, for example, may increase if it's something like salt. So something like that you have to put into consideration. And what theory can you explore in this study? Again, this is something you can build from the literature, and you have to ask yourself, is what I'm doing qualitative or quantitative? And to make sure you brand those. What methodological approach can you use? Again, that really depends on many things. A, the literature you read, and B, what is available in your institutions for you to employ in your study. And who's going to participate in your study? Is it humans or animals, or are you using, let's say, nanoparticles, any physical or softwares? That's very important because you need to make sure you have a plan as to how to access them later on. All right, so we spoke a lot so far about making sure your research is feasible, how to choose the right topic, and we stumbled upon a very important aspect that many researchers may overlook sometimes, which is the ethics behind your studies. I've noticed that many of you are in the medical field already, either in life science or in pharmacy, and I did see others in chemistry and other areas. But this is more for medical and life science students. I'm going to go quickly through it. So mind you that there are many different study designs, and accordingly, there are different ethical considerations you have to put in mind. For retrospective studies, which means you are using results of other studies that been done before, and in that case, if there's human records being involved, you have to seek patients' consent and make sure that their details will not be visible in your thesis later on or when you decide to publish it. And then you have prospective cohort studies. When I say prospective, then basically it's you are studying on a population or a group, and you're observing the results of it over a period of time. And then you have the retrospective, which I explained in the first one, cohort trials. By all means, when it involves human being, make sure informed consent is obtained. And there are three main criteria to make sure that your research is ethical. Participants are kept safe at all times, so nothing to jeopardize their health during your study. Patients know the consequences, and they have the full, let's say, will to leave at any time and still receive the treatment that you have promised them, if it's a treatment, for example, for cancer patients. Okay? If you're using animal models, make sure they comply where your institutional, national, or international guidelines. To extend on it, there are studies that require also some statements, and I'm including them here. Sorry. So the prospective studies that includes the observational, which I said group, and we're performing on them trials for a given time frame. And retrospective studies, which we mentioned, the cross-sectional surveys are basically data. So when you're doing surveys on a given population, like you're sending surveys through Google Docs, or you're using Twitter or Facebook. Not many people know that you have to get their consent, and that's required at least for publication in journals. So that's something you have to keep in mind. And any patient, volunteers, health professional are always their records, and their samples should be kept in, safely. You never share their data with anyone without their consent. And make sure this is being reviewed by your IRB in your institutions or research body. Okay, so here are a few research ethics guidelines for animals. First of all, make sure that they comply with your national, international guidelines. And if you're using animals from other parties, then make sure the client consent is given to you by paper, and adherence to best practices of veterinary care is applied as well. There are reporting guidelines for medical students available out there, and I can give you examples out of it. So we have what we call Equator Guidelines, which is basically for clinical and health professionals. It gives you guidelines you should be using for your article or your thesis or dissertation. So you can search them online, make sure you're aware of them. And there are three principles, we call them the 3 R's that we have to sustain: replace, reduce, and refine. Basically, to replace is to use animals with alternative techniques or avoid using animals unless it's absolutely necessary for your research, and reduce number of used animals to the minimum to obtain information from fewer or more information from the same number of animals. Refine the way of the way experiments are carried out to make sure animals do not suffer, and this includes better housing conditions or improvement to the procedures to minimize the pain they are facing. Many research institutions require you to detail this kind of information, and the National Institute of Health in the US will actually come and review the guidelines before you start your project. So something to keep in mind when you start your dissertation, whether as a PhD student, master student, or a researcher in general and want to get to have more funding. Now, mind you that any improper use of animals is forbidden, and especially when you are handling human or animals. Just make sure your IRB, your internal review board inside your institutions, approve whatever you do. And a general tip for you to follow: use international guidelines because they mostly cover your institutional requirement as well as international requirements whenever you want to publish. One example to that is the Helsinki Declaration. And when reporting experiments on animals, you should indicate whether or not you have what guidelines you have used later on to maintain their health. Sorry. And if you're using clinical trials, for example, you're working on cancer patient, you're using certain drug, then basically this is a clinical trial. Make sure that it's registered and you have a number of that clinical registration later on. And according to the WHO, a clinical trial is any research study that prospectively assigns human participants or groups of humans to one or more health-related intervention to evaluate effects on health outcomes. Okay, so now we have a general idea on how to get a good research topic, what kind of questions we have to ask ourselves before we start. So, how do we get the information we need? And more importantly, what elements do we need to consider when we write our thesis or think about it? Now, for your reference, I'm including few article types here for you to understand that when you write your dissertation as a PhD student or a master student and want to publish it later on, it's going to be a full text article or a research article. Now, full text articles are the most frequent type. They are often substantial, comprehensive, complete pieces of research that are of significance. And why your study is always novel, the one you want to carry your PhD study on, and therefore when you want to publish or write your paper, it will follow the full article guideline later on. There are other forms that when you're still conducting your research as a PhD student that you may want to consider, and it's letter or short communications. And these are quick and early statements, and that's mostly when you have thrilling results that you want to share with people. Like, for example, when you have a new technique or method to combat HIV, then you want to publish an early piece to generate interest from the scientific community and get more funding. And then you have review papers that you may consider later on throughout your career, where you summarize recent development on a specific topic, and most of the time this is submitted by a very experienced researcher. Now, I want you now to give some attention to the process of building your research dissertation. How does it really start? The sequence of writing your dissertation and your research article later when you want to publish is not the same as reading it, and that's something you have to remember. For most scientific fields, the most efficient way to regard your paper and dissertation is building it brick by brick. You start by producing your tables and figures, which are translations of the results you have created in the lab or during your work. Then you will start describing the methodology you have used, the results, and the discussion around these results. Then you write your introduction. Many people think, oh, I will start writing the introduction because this this will make it easier. Well, you can, but the most efficient way is to leave it towards the end when you have already reached your work. And always remember, when you write the introduction, just make sure you include the resources you have actually understood and grasped. And I will go through that later in more details. Now, let's start dissecting your dissertation and the sections of article as well. So your dissertation format may change according to your institution, but always remember that it's very similar to how a research paper is written. So at the beginning, we have the title, the abstract, and keywords. And when you write them, most likely you make sure you leave them towards the end. Do not start with them. You may need to do that when you write your proposal and change them later on, which should be fine, but you should consult your supervisor. Now, the title, the abstract, and keywords play a very important role in promoting your work later on. So not just when you defend your thesis, but also when you publish it. So make sure it's informative. People would know what your paper is talking about just reading those, and they are attractive in a sense that only reading those I would be interested to pursue and read your entire your paper or your dissertation, and they are effective. So they give you the meaning you want to deliver. The next section is called what we call IMRAD, which contains introduction, methods, results, and discussion. Okay, so here at this section is where you present your work and convey the main message. Remember, the main message is the objective you've been trying to achieve ever since you started your study. And always remember, you need to be very comprehensive, but it shouldn't be also very extensive. And towards the end or the last grouping is where the conclusion, the acknowledgement, sometimes the acknowledgement can be at the beginning or at the dedication, as we call it. The dedication is something different from acknowledging. The dedication is to whom you'd like to gift your work. Can be your family, whatever. But remember, you don't have the dedication section in the paper when you are planning to publish. You only may have it in your dissertation or your thesis. And we'll talk more about these aspects, and you will have something we call in the research dissertation for your master's or PhD, the appendix for your work, where you include extra methodologies or results you have used in your work, or definitions. For example, if you're using genes and you want to define their sequence at the end, you do it in the appendix. Okay, so let's just give a brief information about each section. So you start, when you look or read your dissertation, you start with the title. There are certain characteristics you need to consider for effective titles. They should attract the reader's attention. They contain the fewest words possible, so mostly 12 words, not more, and limited to 40 characters, including space. They contain, they adequately describe the content. They are informative but concise. They identify the main problem in your study. So when I read it, I know what's your paper about. Do not be tempted to use technical jargon in your title. In a sense, you know a very fancy word in science and you think it's a good idea to share it. Don't do that. You want to use simple words that many readers and many researchers will understand. And always think that your work is read by many audience from different disciplines, not just from your discipline. Okay? All right, let's go into the introduction. The introduction is used to provide context to your audience, whether it was your institution, your supervisors, or later when you publish your work. Remember to be concise, to give them enough context to understand why your work is important, but it shouldn't be extensive. In a sense, it's a history lesson. So just introduce the main scientific publication in which you base your work on, cite a couple of original and important work, and including recent review articles that were published in the past 3 years. That's very good and will give your work more credibility, whether you're planning to do that for your research dissertation or when you want to publish your paper. And make sure you address the following questions. What is the problem you're trying to ultimately solve? Identify solutions and limitations. Are there any solutions? If so, what is the best solution and what are the limitations? And what's your work trying to achieve? And provide a perspective that is really consistent throughout your work. Now, moving on to the methodology section. If you're using or if you have created your own methodology, make sure it's detailed. Detailed in a sense where a knowledgeable reader should be able to reproduce the experiment. Any previously published procedures should not be rewritten in details. Just make sure you cite them. And you can mention them in your appendix again, unless your supervisor thinks it needs to be included in details in your dissertation, which I doubt it is the case. But by all means, you should mention your equipments and the country of origin for each. And if you're using chemical material, just mention the number of batch, because many studies have shown that there is a batch-batch variation, and that's important factor you need to minimize or to be aware of in your study. Again, we gone through the ethical approval. This is to stress on the importance of ethics. So just make sure your university or your institution is aware of your study and have approved it, in fact. And when you publish, the editors will have the final saying on the ethical standards you have used. So be prepared to address their concerns. And that's why I have always said, make sure you use international guidelines. All right, just to take a bit of breath and moving on now to the results section. Now, when you introduce your results, I know you may be tempted to show all of them, but to make sure you're delivering the right idea, you have to introduce the main results the essential one that would convey your objectives or achieve the objective of your work. So this means only data of primary importance should be displayed at start. Data of secondary importance that have no contribution to your work or objective should not be hidden, but also sent or put in the supplementary material or your appendix of your dissertation. And always make sure to never hide them. And in the future, when you want to publish your work, never be tempted to cut your results into different papers. Many people think, okay, my research study or my dissertation or PhD work can be divided into 3 or 6 papers. That's not the case, and it's very serious, and we don't take it lightly in the research community nor in the publishing industry. Make sure that because this means that your findings or results were diluted and they do not support your conclusion strongly as if you provided all these results together. So make sure that the results you include are all well connected and they address the issues of your study. Now, okay, just to go back one step on the results, I need to stress on few important things. I want you to use subheadings to keep the results of the same type together, simply because this will make the process of reading your dissertation easier. And also, it will help you when you write your paper for publication in the future. And highlight findings that further improves the understanding of your paper first. And also make sure you highlight unexpected results. And also remember, negative results are also results. And make sure you also we have the illustrations, figures, and tables for a good reason. So make sure you employ them. Your figures and illustrations are critical, and they should be used for your essential data. So the data that contributes to the conclusion of your study. Do not use them for secondary data again. Also, remember that when you're drafting your graphs and illustrations, don't use colors unless they are absolutely important. Sometimes results as immunohistochemistry, where you want to show antibodies interaction, for example, it's important. But if you can convey different results using different line styles or symbols, then go with that. Because you have to remember that people may print your work and read it in black and white. And always make sure you include your statistical analysis. What type of statistical analysis you use? Was it chi-square, for example, or any other form of studies? All right. Now moving on to the discussion. The discussion is the fruit of your work. It's one of the most important sections in your dissertation or your paper alike. So this is the section where you sell your data. Now, a huge number of papers in our industry where researchers want to publish their work are rejected because the discussion is weak or because some researcher copy and paste the results in this section. Never do that. And likewise, your supervisor will return it back to you if you do that. So make sure your discussion corresponds and complements the results. Do not simply repeat the results section in here again. Now, to make your discussion stronger, make sure you compare other published results with your own. And do not ignore work. Again, I stress, do not ignore work that is in disagreement with your own findings. Confront it and convince whoever reads your work and your supervisor why you are correct, or even why your results are even better. Now, be careful not to do the following while you're writing your dissertation or your paper. Do not go statements that do not exaggerate your findings. So, because people will not appreciate that. Again, do not say, for example, my findings show that we can cure cancer, because we don't know that for a fact. It cannot be a fact. And do not use non-specific expression like higher temperature, lower. Always use quantitative descriptions. Now, new terms that have not already been defined in your paper should be not added to this section. Probably should use it either in your introduction or in your methodology. If you need to revise your results, it will, make sure it happens before you write your dissertation. It shouldn't happen at the point where you want to deliver your work. My advice for you is that you start writing immediately after you start getting results, because every time you start sooner, this means you will have better chance writing it off. Do not write your thesis 1 to 2 months before defending it. That's a huge no-no. I'm not the best one to give you that advice because I did it, but basically because I was working at the time. But make sure that you always write as you work. And my advice to you as a researcher, make sure you at least read 1 to 2 articles a day. And when you read that article, make sure you summarize it. With time, you will have the skill to write your own summary using your own words rather than copying, and which is completely prohibited. Now, going to the conclusion, which is very important in your dissertation, it's where you show how your work advances your field of study. So be clear in the conclusion to help your supervisors and in the future the editors understand the impact and importance of your work, and provide clear justification for how your work is significant in this section. And this can be achieved by indicating uses, extensions, or applications to your work. Do not repeat the abstract here. The abstract and conclusion serve different purposes, although sometimes the same message is delivered. And also, do not list any result in this section. Don't say there is, don't mention numbers at all. And you may also want to benefit from the fact where you can suggest future experiments that build on your work, or even more importantly, if there's an undergoing work, it's very good to mention it in this section. The acknowledgement part is where you want to thank many entities or important entities that helped you, such as your advisor, your supervisor, any financial supporter like your university, people who helped you proofread your English or any language you've written your work in, people who donated samples to you in this section. All right. Now, people think writing reference is easy thing to do. With today advancement, yes, it is compared to the past, but I want to show you how you can write them and the tools you can use them. But even before, my advice to you is never use many references. So don't use 300 references in your dissertation to make it stronger, because that's not the case. You can use up to 100, but that means you have to absorb all of them. So in a sense, if I came to you and we sat in a one-to-one interview or chat and I asked you about all the reference you've used in your dissertation or in the paper you want to publish, you will tell me what each study contributes and what's about. So that's the measurement I want you to use every time you cite a paper and use it as a reference. Now, if you have previously published, and it can be the case, do not cite yourself excessively throughout the work. Only do that to give a context. And an advice, avoid excessive citations from the same region or institution. And let me give you an example. You love Harvard and certain topics about medicine. Do not use, let's say, 10 or 20 studies from that institutions. Try to minimize it to 2 and diversify your citations to be to include other institutions worldwide. And likewise, try to diversify the regions you're covering in your citations. So other continents or other countries in the same continents. And my advice to you, for the publishing field, for example, if you want to publish your work in the future, make sure you include at least 3 different regions to make your work stronger, because it gives you perspective that you know what's going on in the field. And make sure you use the format detailed by your institution, whether it's an APA format, for example, or MLA, whatever. Just make sure you use it. All right. Now we're moving forward to another section, which is how to select research tools that will help you achieve your tasks. First of all, let's start with search engines and databases. I can tell you can see one familiar face, which is Google Scholar. Many of you use Google Scholar to search for papers, and it's a good place to look at. I would like to also share other resources like the Directory of Open Access Journals. It's a good place. It's for free. And the Directory of Open Access Journals is a community-curated online directory that provides access to high-quality, open-access, peer-reviewed journals. It's independent, and all funding that it receives, it comes via donations. So make sure you access it and you use it as a search engine if you want to look for a paper. Then you have the Pubmed Central. Pubmed Central, it's a free digital repositories that archives open access full text scholarly articles that have been published in biomedical and life science field. And you can search for it and find detailed, let's say, articles for your work. And you will not have to worry about, let's say, looking for the full version of it. Now, if you're not from the medical field, you can use Science Open, as you can see to the bottom right. Science Open is a website that is freely accessible and offers many services to researcher. And there are more than 26 million articles from many publishers. So you may want to use that in your search when you read your literature. Okay. Something to keep in mind. When I was a master's student, I once had the mistake of never saving an extra copy on a safe place. What I did basically, 1 week before defending my thesis, is that my computer completely got reformatted by itself. So I lost my entire work. And I didn't have a copy of it saved on another place. So this is a huge mistake. And I had to write my thesis in its entirety in just 1 week. And you don't want that extra stress in your life. So one of the good things or tools you have to keep in mind is a storage or file backup that syncs in real time as you edit your file. Dropbox is one of them. Dropbox is available for free, and you can use it to you use it on your smartphone, and you can install a copy of your files and make sure you never use them. And you can share them with other people, for example, your supervisor, just in case you want them to give comments rather than going back and forth by mail. So that's something you can do. It's very useful and keeps your work safe. So make sure you always, whenever you start writing, whenever you have your data, save them in another place as well. Another tool that researchers take for granted but are absolutely important is the Office suite. And Microsoft Word helps a lot in at least writing the paper, formatting it according to the style you should use by your institution. The PowerPoint when you want to defend your thesis, which has a lot of functionalities you can use. The Excel, I cannot stress how important the Excel is for you, whether it was to create plots, graphs, and data. And it's not only for a certain subject area, it's for all subject fields, whether you are in life science or medicine. And there are many tutorials available there online to help you use each one of them. Another tool you should be using during your studies, and it's plagiarism detection softwares. Before you deliver your work to your supervisor, or even when you want to submit to a journal, make sure you run it through what we call plagiarism detection software tool. And basically, these type of tools check the similarity, the degree of similarity of your work to other resources published online in other databases. And one of them, which is available, the trial of it is available for free. We call it Turn It In or Authenticate. Your supervisor, at least, should have access to these tools. And there is a link that is here mentioned in this resource that is for free called Plagiarism Checker. You may want to play with it and see the degree of similarity. Now, this screenshot, as you can see here, shows the similarity index. And this means that 90% of the work mentioned here was copied, pasted by different resources. Each one of them is colored to indicate the resources the copy paste was from. And this is to tell you that people, your supervisor, can know whenever you have copied other people's work. So don't do that. And to help you reference and help you write your references in a certain format, the Endnote is freely available for you. And you can customize it and write it according to the style that is mentioned. Now, again, Endnote is very easy to use. It manages citations and references for articles. It's produced by Clarivate, which is the people who created it. As you can see here, whenever you have a citation, you click on it, it will direct you immediately to the reference down in your article. This is a very good way, and it makes sure that you have cited all the articles correctly. And for more information on how to use Endnote, here's a link to how to use Endnote in 6 minutes. Okay, I want to also share a reference manager and social collaboration network called Mandalay. Now, Mendeley, you can access it anywhere for free, either from your phone or from your laptop. Now, Mendeley is a reference manager like Endnote. It generates citations and bibliographs in any format, whether it was Microsoft Word or OpenOffice or LaTeX if you are a mathematician. You can search a citation and insert it in your paper while using Mendeley, and it provides access to more than 30 million papers, the citations, not the paper. And you can import any other resources that is not available, organize it in the way you deem appropriate, and you can save it as well. You can search the work with other researchers and discuss with them using this platform. It's similar like what we call ResearchGate. I'm sure many of you are aware of ResearchGate. So this serves the same purpose. Now, LinkedIn. As you may be surprised, 60% of researchers today use LinkedIn. It can be used for connection opportunities, collaboration opportunities, but most importantly, it can help you be aware of what's going on in the field. So if you want to promote your profile, find new research ideas, make sure that you have a strong profile. And that includes details of your education, your volunteer experience, any certificates that you have. And if you have published before, it's the perfect place to add it, as well as if you attended a conference. Make sure you're always engaged in other groups. You will find in LinkedIn there are hundreds and hundreds of groups in there. So stay active, follow them, and know what's going on in your area. It will help you greatly. I know many students who actually got advice from researchers on different, let's say, groups on LinkedIn, and it helped them change or solve problems they faced in their research work. And this is just a general slide to show you the different resources that can be useful for you. One of them that I would highly advise you to use is called Grammarly. Grammarly corrects the grammar for you. And if you connect with it in subscription, it will also give you advanced options in how to make sure you deliver your work in the best way possible, keeping the context in place. But you can use the free version pretty much as well. All right. And this is a tool that really has more than 70 functionality. The link is over here for those interested. It's not really essential, but what I'm trying to deliver here, there are many resources out there to help you get connected, sort your work, search for the literature, and stay up to date with what's going on in the field, and also provide a proper analysis of your work. So make use of them. All right. So now I think we have half an hour and or 40 minutes. I'd like to use it in going through the basics. So now you got more idea of how to think of a proper research topic, how to ask the right research questions, resources you can use to solve the problems and make your life easier while you write and prepare your ideas. Now I want to go through the process of getting your work published. I will only include the basics over here. And let's start. All right, so you defended your thesis, and now you're looking for a scholarship, whether it's a PhD, or you want more funding for, let's say, to work on another research idea. Then you need to publish your work as a start. And whenever you want to pursue that, you need to consider the journal that you want to publish your work in. Now, it's very important when you do that is that you make sure you choose a journal that will suit your audience. Now, I've noticed that there are 40% of or 50% of the audience, if not more, are undergrad. So when I talk about journals, journals are outlets where researchers publish their work and gets visibility, and people can reach it and access it. I've shared databases earlier, like Pubmed Central, where then you get a few research articles, you read them. The place where these papers are published, we call them journals. And journals are places are accredited, so places where people are convinced that the paper was the work was done in an ethical manner, that is peer reviewed, which means other researchers have looked and approved of it for you to read it. Okay, now let's go back to how to choose a right journal for you. Now, make sure that when you choose your journal, that is related to you. And it's not outside, because if it's outside your scope, it will get rejected. Not even because the quality, but because the topic doesn't fit the journal. It's very important that you don't submit your work. So you have your research work available now for you as a paper. Do not submit the same paper to many other journals on the same time. This is what we call simultaneous publication, and it's completely prohibited. And when editors find out, your paper will be rejected. Now, also make sure when you want to write your paper that you ask other colleagues who went through that experience to get you more idea on how to do it. And more importantly, also check with your other colleagues who did that with you, who conducted the work with you. You can't submit a research work without including your colleagues who participated significantly in the work. And I'm going to go through what a co-author and other colleagues who will participate in your work. Now, also when you think about your candidate journal, it's more of a homework. Create a checklist and include different things in it. First of all, the aims and scope. The aims and scope basically means what's the journal about, the topics it covers, and that's very important for you, again, to avoid early rejection, which means your paper rejected without even going for a review by editors and researchers. Now, you have to also check the accepted types of articles that journal holds. There are certain journals that accepts only case reports, for example, or experimental procedures. If you're publishing a review paper or a full text article, you don't want to publish in these journals. So make sure you are aware of those. Third factor is circulation. Where is this paper? Who reads my paper? Is it only, let's say, Arabs, or is it Western people? You need to make sure that your paper reaches the right audience. So whether international, regional, you have to make sure that you know what the journal is covering. Trending topics, which is very important. So when you publish your work, it may very well be a trending or not. So when you search your journal, make sure that it's an important topic in the aims and scope, because it means if it's trending topic in the field and for the journal, then basically your paper will get more citations. Citations, it means how many time other researchers will use your work as a reference in theirs. And every time your work is used as a reference, your citations will increase, meaning that in the future you will have a higher ranking. So something to keep in mind. So how does it go? So you have chosen the journal. How does it normally happen? It goes according to this cycle. You start, first of all, by going to the journal website and then the online submission system. Online submission system is where your article will be submitted and reviewed. Then experts in the field will have a look at it and validate it. They can either accept it without changes, which is unlikely. They can either go through rounds of revision, either major, minor, before it's published, or reject it. It could be rejected either because the work is not of interest to them again, or because they feel that your work needs significant changes or alterations in the methods. Sometimes it may not be the case. Now remember, the PRIS cycle is very important in today's processes and in sciences. And the author of the PRIS cycle got rejected several times in many prestigious journals before it was accepted, and he won a Nobel Prize 25 years later. So have no despair, but always make sure you use the comments you get on your paper to improve it. And then it will go to final publication, which it will appear online to you and other readers. And the article promotion is also on your part. So you can share it on social media or in indexation databases where the journal is covered. For example, Pubmed or Pubmed Central and other libraries. One thing that was not in the dissertation, so when I have explained or went through the structure of a dissertation, it's very similar to a research article. But there's one element that is not available in the dissertation, which is the cover letter. Now, the cover letter, whenever you send one, it has a certain structure. It has a heading and includes to whom the letter is addressed. Normally, it's the editor name and the title of the journal and the title of your paper and the date. You have to include short introduction about you, 2 lines only, brief description of your study and title, 3 lines, no more, and the importance of your study. Why is it important? And why is it important for the journal? And convince them how it's related to the scope of the journal you're publishing in. And statement of the originality. Originality means you have never published it in any journal before and that your work has never been conducted. Also, you need to acknowledge your colleagues and other peers who provided and gave you feedback on your work. It can be, you can mention the financial support you got or other support from a donation of samples or let's say language editing. Now, before you publish in any journal, make sure you read the author guideline. The author guideline is a sacred document, okay? And in a sense, it's a checklist that gives you idea on things you need to consider before you publish. There are certain elements that are in it. So, for example, gives you idea on the article type, how the submission process goes in, how to prepare your paper, how to organize the structure of your article. For example, if you're publishing a research article, they may provide you certain requirement like the number of references, the number of words in your abstract, number of words in your introduction. Similarly, like when you consider writing your thesis dissertation. Okay, so now you've written your paper, you've submitted your paper to a journal. How does it go? So it starts with you submitting it, and then it goes to reviewers or technical check. Technical check is the phase where there are certain people who will look at your paper and see whether you meet their requirements. They will compare it according to the guidelines they have for the journal. Did you achieve the requirements? If yes, they will assign reviewers for you, collect the comments, and take a decision. If accept, they will publish. If there is a review, it will go back over here, return to you. Sometimes it can get rejected because you're either outside the scope again, or it needs significant improvements. I was talking about review and that experts will check your work. And the peer review is a very important process in science. That's actually the only way we consider proper to validate the soundness of science. And again, peer review is the process where your paper gets read by experts in the field, and normally editors of the journal where you submit your work to will send it to at least 2 to 3 experts in the field to give their comments, whether your work is good, whether it requires feedback or edits. There are 3 most common types of peer review. One of them is the single blind, the double blind, and the open review. Make sure you remember those, and I will go in details in them now. So the single blind review. The single blind review is where the reviewer, who's the expert who looks at your paper, knows you as an author and can see your affiliation. For example, a researcher published from Jordan University in Science and Technology. The reviewer can see the author detail from JUST, but the author does not know anything about the reviewer. You can't know their name, you cannot know their affiliation. So that's single blind. The good side of it is that it allows the reviewer to be honest without the fear of getting criticized by the author, which is you. And knowing who the author is will allow the reviewer to use their knowledge of the researcher's previous work. So they will give you better feedback. The probable, let's say, negative aspect of it is that reviewer may give harsh comments, knowing your affiliation or knowing that you're still new to the field. And knowledge of the author may overshadow the quality of the work. Sometimes there are personal affairs between scholars, and they may use it, unfortunately, but we depend that they will not, and that the process of its integrity depends on people taking commitment to provide the best sound feedback. Again, there's also a possibility for potential discrimination based on gender or nationality, where the author is coming from. Now, the double-blind review is where the process, where the reviewer does not know the identity and affiliation of the author, and vice versa. Now, the good side of it is research is judged fairly without bias or fear of criticism. The bad side of it is reviewers may give harsh comments, but that's in any type of peer review. Reviewer may still be able to identify authors. And let me give you examples. Sometimes, let's say, good researchers who've read hundreds or sometimes thousands of research will know the style of each researcher they've read in that subject field. So, for example, I have a colleague called Muna, and she's expert in, let's say, nanoparticles and stem cells application. and I've read hundreds of papers, and I know her style. So when I read one of her papers, I will know it's Muna, though I can't see her, let's say, affiliation or see her name. So that's one of the downsides. Now, knowledge of the author's identity helps the reviewer to come to more informed judgment. So if I know that this reviewer is still new to the field, I may not give harsh comments. I may want to give them, you know, constructive criticism, which means guide them on to write their papers in a better way. The third type of peer review is called the open peer review, where reviewers and authors know each other. It's not a commonly used type of peer review. One repository is it, which is Pubmed Central. Sorry, not Pubmed Central, PLOS. The PLOS one publisher uses that, where the author paper is posted online and reviewers can come and comment, and I can see the reviewers' comments and names, and it will be posted for example, for a period of time. And if accepted by these reviewers, it will go to a second round of peer review internally without the author knowing the, let's say, background of the reviewers. Now, the good side of it, reviewers become more constructive while giving their feedback because they know the authors know their identity. Reviewers become more, let's say, detailed about the review because their name is appearing, so their reputation is being held. Now, the downside of it may lead to less honest and critical review in some cases. Reviewers may refuse criticizing the work of more senior researchers out of respect. So that's the downside. So how to choose? Again, there's no peer review type that is better than the other one. The peer review type is chosen based on the journal editor's preference and the publisher. It has nothing to do with you as an author. So don't choose a journal based on the peer review only. Whether it's a single blind or a double blind or open peer review, all of these types of peer review are used to enhance the quality of science. And there's no evidence till today that says there's one type better than the other one. All right. Now, I've been talking a lot about the publishing ethics, the importance of it, and now there are many things I want you to understand as a researcher for your own good. You want to publish, but you're still new in the field. There are certain aspects I want you to be aware of. So, what is the ethics? What's the first word that you think of? When most people think of ethics or morals, they think of rules distinguishing the right and wrong, such as the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. This is the most common way of defining the ethics norm, to conduct that distinguish between acceptable and unacceptable behavior. Most people learn ethics at their childhood or work or any other social environments, but it's very important to set rules in our society because remember, what people consider right, others consider wrong. And one of the examples I can give you about is many countries view abortion differently. So that's why we have ethics rule in place. So there are few things that when we think about it, and you can define it yourself on what you consider as an ethics. So how did it evolve? Research ethics evolved after the incident in World War II, where the Germans have experimented on many of hundreds and hundreds of human beings in concentration camps, and they have given them drugs without their consent, and without telling them what would happen. And it ended up many of them died, or many of them were crippled. And ever since then, these people were put into action. So all these physicians who, let's say, experimented on these prisoners at World War II were prosecuted, and ever since, the research ethics, no research in the world will be accepted without having it approved by a research body. Now, there are three what we call cardinal of sins and of research conduct, which is falsification, fabrication, and plagiarism. They are all primary concerns in any research misconduct, and any diversions from this norm undermines the integrity of your research. Now, let me give you examples. The falsification is where researchers manipulate the data to support claims, hypotheses, or other data. For example, you have the p-value to say your research is significant or not, right? So sometimes researchers would eliminate few results in their paper. They would shift the decimal and make their p-value significant. This is what we call p-hacking, and it's completely unacceptable. Okay. The fabrication. Fabrication is a process where people make up data, observation on their own. So they never, for example, worked on that research. And I can give you example is Cygen. Cygen, it's a software or a tool that was created by the MIT in the United States. One of the undergrad students was playing with the software, and he created a tool that would generate research papers from trash. So you just add keywords, and that software will generate a written paper. But that kind of papers does not make sense, and nowadays it's being detected by many fabrication detection tools. And then you have the plagiarism, which where you take the credit for someone else's work. So you copy paste other people's work or use their softwares, and I'll go into more details about it soon. So there are many types of misconduct, and there are a few which I will go through, but plagiarism, which is in purple, is one of the highest rates. And when you have the disputed authorship being number one. And I want to give you some sound advice on how to avoid it. Disputed authorship is where one of the authors have problems with another one. So let's go into the authorship. So what does it really mean to be an author? An author is generally considered to be someone who has made substantial intellectual contribution to a published study. Now, being an author comes with credit, but it also comes with responsibility and decisions about who will be an author and the order of authors. So the order of author is something you decide before you submit your paper for publications, okay? And determining the order of authors on a paper can vary by discipline. So in math, for example, the order of authors may not be the same. Sometimes the senior researcher can be at first or at the end. It really depends. Or on the institutional guideline. Some institutions say the master student or PhD student should be the first, and sometimes they say they should be the corresponding author. Corresponding author means is where the person who handles communication with the journal that the work is published in. Now, mind you that a corresponding author can very much be the first author. Has nothing to do with the order of authors. And now, there are general rules for you to be considered a first author. Normally, as a rule of thumb, it's not always static, but first author is the person who conducted or supervised the data collection, analysis, presentation, and interpretation of the results and puts together the paper for submission. The corresponding author, again, can be the first or sometimes a senior one from your institution. But again, they should have significant contribution. Now, determining the order of authors, again, is something guided by your institution, so make sure you always seek your university before you do it. It's always recommended to avoid ghost authorship, which means removing an author who did the work. Sometimes supervisors or research bodies would eliminate an author who did the work or had the credit and without the author's knowledge. This is completely prohibited. And my advice to you as a researcher to prevent this happening to you, if you want to ever participate in any research idea or project in your university or any research institution outside, make sure you have evidence that your name has been set in the research proposal or any research communication, that you're one of the authors that participated in the work. Always have evidence for you to confront them later on when the work is presented and published online. Now, there are, I understand that there's variations of how you're considered an author, but there are general policies. And one of them that I want you to be aware of is the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, who declared for you to be an author, there are three very important aspects. First of all, for you to be an author, you have to have substantial contribution to the conception, to the creation of the idea and design, to generating the data, analyzing the data, and telling people what the data means. So the discussion and the conclusion, for example, and writing the article. For you to be an author, you should take part in writing it as well. And also give approval on the final version of the paper. All three criteria must be met. Otherwise, you will be considered an acknowledged individual, like people who donated samples. Who donated samples cannot be authors, but they can be mentioned in the acknowledgement. People who language edited your paper cannot be considered authors, but rather mentioned in your acknowledgement. Anyone who helped you give a perspective should be mentioned in the acknowledgement and shouldn't be an author. All right, let's move on to plagiarism. According to many, let's say, bodies, plagiarism is the appropriation of another person's idea. So basically, in easier words, stealing someone else's idea, processes, results, or words without giving the appropriate credit. So mentioning their name or their how they contributed to it. And it can be through, for example, if you were in discussing a confidential idea with someone and they leaked your idea even before it was published, then it's considered plagiarism. And people can be held responsible as long as you can prove that you have created that work originally. Now, plagiarism is not really good because it makes people, or it causes regression in the way science advances, because people loses the motivation of writing more research. So how to avoid it? But before maybe how to avoid it, things that can be plagiarized. Words. So either you copy words or idea. Someone else had an idea and you decided to take it. That's plagiarism. Someone else's findings. Graphical representations or graphs, computer programs, diagrams, lectures. So using online lecture and copying for what it is or using it without giving the appropriate credit is plagiarism. Or any other original work. Anything that you haven't made, created by yourself, you just took it for yourself, is considered plagiarism. So how to avoid plagiarism? Because there are many new researchers or even people who are interested in research that fall into that innocent mistake sometimes. But there are three ways to avoid that. So know that it's pretty much unacceptable to use the exact phrases from original source without enclosing them in quotation marks. So if you feel there's a sentence that you want to use as is from a paper, just write them in quotation mark, mention the source where they're taken from. Simulating sentence structure even without using different words. So, for example, you have an original idea, sorry, you read an article and you loved the main idea the paper is talking about. You can't use the exact structure the paper was written in, because that's plagiarism. You have to come up with your own style, as we said. And that only happens when you read on a daily basis, when you summarize using your own words. And even when you summarize using your own words, if you are basing on someone else's work, you have to cite them. And there's some interesting, people would do it. For example, what we call patchwork plagiarism, which is basically you like a word or a sentence from one paper, a paragraph from another paper, and you paste them in your work. This is completely unacceptable as well. Just make sure people know you've written, use your own style, and cite whenever needed. So, always make sure that you cite your work, even if it was your own. And it's very important for the advancement of science as well as yours. Again, I'm going back now to authenticate or turn it in what we call similarity check reports. I'm showing you again how the reports look like. Many publishers use this, many editors as well. So for any journal you're submitting in, if it's a good journal, they're going to use a plagiarism detection tool. So Authenticate, to give you a better idea what it does, it detects similarities between papers that were published before and your submission. It compares uploaded files against a database which has more than 70 million articles and books that publisher decided to collaborate on. There's more than 600 publishers that feed their work into this database to make sure the accuracy of this tool is high. So the main message is that no matter how you think you're good at rephrasing, if you're not doing it correctly, editors will know. So if you have cited before, if you have published your work before, and you want to base it on, again, and you decided to build another research idea on the previous work you've done, just make sure you cite even your own self. And many publishers, scientific community are debating about self-citation. Again, self-citation is when you cite your own self. But it's always better to err on the side of caution. So even if you're citing your own self, do it. Just don't do it quite a lot. Just do it when it makes sense. So what happens if you don't follow the ethical approval? What happens when you plagiarize other work of others and you don't rephrase it your own way? There are many consequences that aren't really great, and one of them is get your work stamped in red, like as you're seeing here, to mention that is no longer available online, and the advice is that you can't cite it. And we add a notice when we remove a paper online to mention why it was removed. So in this example that you're seeing here in this screenshot, we mentioned why it has been removed. And it can be, for example, for a duplication, and sometimes can really get detailed, and researcher can lose their job. They can get demotions and lose other opportunities in the future. So make sure you don't do that. So competing interests, it's a very important topic. So again, make sure you always mention if you have a conflict of interest. And there are many types. You have direct, indirect, and career and personal belief conflict of interest. So conflict of interest is any relationship you have with other parties or with yourself that can impact the objectivity of your work. It can be, for example, if a direct financial conflict of interest, I'll give you an example. It's like a researcher is studying the impact of Coca-Cola on health while he's working in a Coca-Cola company. That's a direct financial conflict of interest. indirect financial conflict of interest when you are hired as a consultant for Coca-Cola company and conducting research for them. Career or intellectual conflict of interest is, for example, when you submitted your paper because you know one of the editors in that journal is working with you in the institution or will help you get promoted in that institution. So the objectivity of your work is not the same. Sometimes it's personal belief. So uh, let me give you an example. Some people think that herbal medicine is better than conventional medicine, and they would give that from their personal experience because they got healed using thyme, for example. That's a conflict of interest. Now, it may sound bad, but conflict of interest is unavoidable. So make sure to declare it whenever possible. And it doesn't mean mentioning conflict of interest in your paper that your paper will get rejected. Not at all. But what the editors you'll help them do is that you'll get them seek the appropriate advice from experts to make sure your paper is objective. While if you don't, bad consequences can happen in the future. So make sure you mention any conflict of interest in the future in your paper. So in sum, I think we're reaching towards the end. The journey of achieving your goal as a researcher or getting the title is not a straight line or even a master degree or a senior researcher. It's actually a frustrating journey, but if you use, let's say, a methodology, and if you organize your time, if you use the right tool, you will reach your goal. And do not get frustrated by any other environment or other people. But make sure you always seek advice, ask questions whenever needed. And it's a maze. It's not a direct line again, but you will reach there eventually, and you will achieve your dreams. And I hope that you found this of interest to you. What I will do now is I will open the door for questions. Thank you for listening, and now we will start an interactive discussion. I will check your questions, and if you have any questions that I was not able to answer, this is my email. Okay, now let me stop sharing and go back to you. Okay, let me start going to the top. Okay, a very good question. What is the accepted percentage for plagiarism? Reality is there is no accepted rate of plagiarism. Sometimes authors can be held responsible for a similarity of less than 10%. Sometimes they can be forgiven for 25% of plagiarism. It depends where the plagiarism is found. So if it's found in your results, it's more serious than if it's found in your methods. That's why I'm telling you, if you have ever found, if you are using someone else's methodology, just make sure you don't write it in detail and just cite it, or add it in your supplementary material, because detection tools do not count the supplementary material. And let me go for more. No, it's not 15% again. Some institutions set a percentage, so you have to adhere to, but in publishing, no, we don't. I remember we rejected paper for 5% plagiarism, and because they were copying the results of someone else's work. Okay, and yes, I can send you the presentation. I will provide this to the moderators of this session, and they will share it with you as they deem appropriate. Is the review paper the same as survey? No. The review paper basically is a summarization of previous studies in the field. It gives you a comprehensive idea of what other researchers did in the past and recent studies of what's happening now. Surveys, on the other hand, it's mostly concerning data. and it measures responses. So it can either be for social studies, which is mostly used for social studies, or medical studies, where, or even, let's say, social media studies, for example. And again, I'm glad that you found it useful. Very happy for that. And yes, I will share the presentation. Okay. Um, okay, a very good question. So what does it make the thesis different from the paper you publish? The thesis is way more extensive. So I can give you example that my thesis was around 125 pages. But even my thesis, it was basically, the lining is different. You have certain format by your institutions that you need to adhere by. And there's certain spaces as paging number and how you can write it. But in the end, whether it was your thesis or it was your paper, they delivered the same idea. It's not as much as your research paper is not as much as detailed as your thesis either. I need to know, is it the author responsibility to write the article in the form that we see when downloading? Okay, that's a great question. So when you submit your paper to a journal, you either submit it in a Word or a PDF, okay? And when you enter the online submission system, there are certain requirements you have to go and fill before your paper is submitted. But once it's accepted in a Word format, okay? And the publishers are responsible for the final version. So the answer is no. How it looks like on the final form is not your responsibility. It's the publisher's responsibility. Where it's included, how it's circulated is also the publisher's responsibility. So I can give you example for one of my journals. It's called Journal of Epidemiology and Global Health. When a researcher submits their paper, it's in a Word document. But once it's accepted, we send it to production. Production is where your paper is formatted in a certain way, and then it looks in a very nice HTML PDF. HTML is the online version, and the PDF is how it looks like when you download it. And when we do that, we make sure that your article has something we call digital object identifier, which is your fingerprint. Each paper has a unique number that no article shares the same. This is how we ensure that no one duplicates your work in the future. And this is how you also, let's say, assess the promotion or how the visibility of your work through citations. And say your paper now is in a full PDF. As a publisher, I'm responsible to deliver it to different indexation databases like Pubmed, Scopus. Scopus is a large indexation database body where the researcher can count their citations and know their impact. So the responsibility of circulating it to other databases is the publishers and not you. You can also help by, of course, circulating it to various databases like LinkedIn, Facebook. Just make sure you share the link of your study, because then as a publisher, I can let you know how many times your paper was downloaded. And it's a better way to avoid people taking your work. How many resources should be in the introduction? That's a very good question again, but that's really decided by the journal you're submitting to or by your institution. So each article type has a different resource requirement. Sometimes for a research article, we would say only write an introduction of 500 words. And the number of reference, I would say, it's very good to at least include 5 or up to 10 in there. But we're not very specific about the number of references in the introduction, but we are more picky about number of references in the entire paper, okay? Now, remember that number of reference is crucial also in your discussion, because there's where you compare how your work is significant and important compared to other studies, okay? And another thing I can think of, just make sure you check the author guideline. It gives you idea how many number of reference you should use. And again, make sure you cite recent articles that were published in the past 3 years. That will give you more credibility, and include at least resources that were published in different regions and different institutions. I can't see the screen. You post your email. Okay. I will send my, you can, if you have any questions, I can again circulate my email. I will type it here shortly. And again, I'm available on LinkedIn and Facebook using the same name. I'm pretty much, in terms of activity on, let's say, research, it's more on LinkedIn. How I can improve the way I rephrase information? A very good question. So make sure you read an article every day, okay? That article you read, I want you to write a 1 page about it. You can, every time, you can start with a paragraph. In that paragraph, for example, or 1 page, I want to understand the following. Who wrote that paper? From where they are, and how important they are, what's the methodology they have used, what's the conclusion they have reached to, and why is it important. Do that every day. With time, it will become an acquired skill. So, and it's very good to set a target. Can an undergrad publish, or that is difficult? No. My friend was an undergrad when she published 3 research papers, and all of them had an impact factor. So it isn't difficult. It's about finding the right outlet for you. It's very easy if you do it in a constructive manner. Okay, the next questions. I took so much time in writing the review in master degree, searching for papers, then reading them, then choosing what I need, then starting to write with paraphrasing with several words. So how to avoid the loss of time in PhD and how to make it easier. Again, I hope that now you have a better idea on how to rephrase your papers, but most importantly, it's unavoidable. Do not add many references. That's the point. Add references you can read at start and summarize. Then only include what's related to your work. You can start reading 100 of paper, but you can end up including only 40. So that's something I would be cautious about. How many number of reference you include in your paper. How LinkedIn help in finding research ideas? Very good. There are many groups in LinkedIn. I have subscribed to biotechnology forums, and they would link you to different, let's say, profiles or people or ideas. They share topics about research articles, so it's very good. Is publishing a survey considered the same as publishing a paper? Not always. So normally the impact of publishing papers is the highest. So you have review articles, papers, they normally receive higher citations compared to other article types, but it doesn't mean that other article types are not included. But normally for promotion purposes, focus on research articles and review papers. Citation programs, I wouldn't say Endnote is better than Mandalay. You have to try for yourself and see. Endnote and Mendeley, they are both very easy to use. Just check what is better for you. If your topic deals with algorithm and ML, how many topics we start searching? That depends on your institutional requirement. I would start again with reading at least 1 article per day, summarizing that in 1 page, and do that on the course of 1 week, and see how that works for you. If I want to make a systematic review, is it acceptable to use only one site like PubMed to collect papers for 5 years? No, don't use one source. Use multiple sources. PubMed is a reliable source, I would say, but don't restrict yourself. There are many available search engines and for researchers out there, and many journals. Do not use one journal for your work. Do not use one search engine for your work. use as many, and I hope the list I provided for you is good. Where are the best programs to be used in representing graphs and figures? There are many, programs that can represent your graphs and figures, and one of them I can give you straight ahead is Excel. It's the easiest to use, and it will give you beautiful graphs, and it's basic for all, let's say, for all fields. And you have ANOVA and SSP, so you have SPSS, sorry. So you have to explore those. But SPSS is very easy to use. ANOVA isn't that easy, but ANOVA is for 2 variables for your study. If the research is rejected by the journal, what should I do? Do not despair. Just make sure it's normal to get rejected. You may get rejected 5 to 10 times, but the lesson you need to learn is that you use the critique that has been given to you to make your paper better. And do I recommend a specific plagiarism software? Yes, Turnitin. It's for free. And if you can have access to Authenticate, it's the best. So finding the right supervisor is a nightmare. It's not going to be perfect, but since you're stuck in your area, make sure you have a good supervisor. I must say, I haven't had an easy journey. It made me suffer for more than a year. And you either learn to take it yourself forward, which is not really easy or fun, or if your supervisor isn't of a great help, just make sure your co-advisor can help you, or you have competent friends, but your supervisors are key people to help you. So what do you do if you don't feel motivated enough to read on a daily basis? Yeah, that's a very good question. So there are many podcasts out there that you can read, and again that you can listen to. Sorry, and many YouTube channels as well. As weird as that sounds, you can find things on YouTube related to your field, and always choose a topic that you're passionate about. And when you feel demotivated, just take a step back to reflect on why you should do it. Take a break for at least 2 hours to meditate, and as weird as it sounds, just make sure you have other activities. It doesn't mean that you are a research student or a PhD student or a researcher that you don't do anything in life. For you to have a good mentality, you need to get engaged in different activities. So make sure you exercise and meditate at least 3 times a week. It will help you a lot. And also make sure you have planned activities. So just have a calendar that reminds you of tasks, you do it. Always arrange your day according to a checklist. So write 10 things to do and arrange them according to their urgency. It will be very easy to do it. Okay. Is it better to the same reference in the introduction and discussion? It really depends. It depends on the idea you're trying to deliver. Just make sure that you are not excessively citing the same reference throughout the article. Just what makes sense. That's the most important thing. What is nearly acceptable number of papers to be included in a thesis? I'm not sure I understood that, Basnat. Can you rephrase that for me? Reading more did help in understanding more and deeper. That is not finding novel ideas. So how can I come up with the ideas for master theses that my field is so wide? Biological sciences. Oh, I come from that field too. It really goes down to a very important question. What are you good at? What do you love? And what is the field that you have a budget in and something you can achieve? So ask these questions, make a checklist, have more than one option, debate them, and ask people for feedback. And an advice as well, try to find a field that you can work on in the future. Okay, Coursera is of great help, and thank you for sharing my LinkedIn profile. Is it okay to use articles that was published almost 10 years ago? In social science, yes. If you're basing your idea on a very important field, then also, um, or you're trying to deliver a very important idea and you need a basic, yes. But just make sure you at least have recent references that were published. Every time you publish a recent reference in your work, that gives you more credibility. So just make sure. What is the plagiarism program that supports Arabic? There's none yet. And many researchers in UAE and try to support that. I'm trying to work on that as well. So for those interested, which is a side project, contact me. We can do that. Thank you for the feedback. I read a review paper which has summarized several papers and have paraphrased a specific paragraph. Should I cite? Yes. You should cite the original resources that mention it. What if after trying to induce a certain animal model, a lot of published before, but unfortunately does not produce? Yeah. Again, I said sometimes a negative result is a result, and sometimes you need to check the study design. If your animal model is not working, check your study design. You need to check all variables you have and make sure they are optimized in accordance with that research study you're using as a reference. Thank you for those who have joined. Any further questions, please feel free to email me or reach out to one of the volunteers, and I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you for your attendance, and I'm glad you found this session useful.